Research has found that because Botox makes it more difficult to frown and more difficult to involve the frown muscles, that it often seems to have some effects on depression and on mood.
You wrote this incredible book, What Your Body Knows About Happiness.
There's absolutely no research suggesting that 10,000 steps has any validity whatsoever. People were given warm cup of coffee to hold or an iced coffee to hold. Then they were brought into a lab and they were asked to evaluate how they felt about people. And the people who were given the warm coffee to hold found the people much warmer and kinder than the people who were given the iced coffee.
Is it true that studies have proven that Botox can lessen depression?
Isn't that crazy? Yes, it is absolutely true. And here's the reason, which is that our brains are constantly taking information from our bodies. We think it's the other way around. We think our brains are telling our bodies what to do. But if you put your face into a smile, your brain is scanning your body and going, oh, we're smiling, we must be happy. And the research has found that because Botox makes it more difficult to frown and more difficult to involve the frown muscles, that it often seems to have some effects on depression and on mood. So that if your face can't go into a frown, as your brain is scanning constantly the muscles to see what's going on, it never gets the message of, we're frowning, we're unhappy. So it's a pretty good reason to use Botox, which I don't, but maybe I should.
That's incredible. Yes. So, okay. So then if you're looking in the mirror, each time you look in the mirror, you probably look a little more happy. And so then it reiterates the fact that, oh, I must be happy.
That's right. There's something that's called the facial feedback hypothesis, which has been proven over and over again, which is that how we hold our facial muscles dramatically influences how we feel. And there were experiments a long time ago where people were given a pencil to hold in their mouths. And some of them held it so that it was the smile muscles that were activated, and some so that the frown muscles were activated. And the people who had the smile muscles activated felt happier than the people who had the frown muscles activated. Now, you like to think that your brain is smart enough to know whether you're smiling or holding a pencil in your mouth. But the truth is that those mind-body loops are very powerful and you can't really change them. So yes, if you're looking in the mirror and your face is smiling, you don't even have to be looking in the mirror because your brain is taking in the information.
This is amazing. And I know we're going to get so much deeper into this. I love the mind body connection. You wrote this incredible book, which I have here if you're watching on video, What Your Body Knows About Happiness. And I would like to know, what was the most shocking or surprising thing that you learned during your research in writing this book?
I think it was the general concept that the brain is not always in control. So I'm a brainy person, I'm a person who lives very much in my head. I'm a writer. And we all tend to think of our brains as being what controls who we are, what we do. I think the comedian John Mulaney has said that he pretty much thinks his body is just used to carry his head around. He doesn't really have any other use for his body. And it's sort of how a lot of us feel. And then I discovered that so much of what is happening is not going from brain to body, it's going from body to brain. And your brain, basically, you can think of it as just this 3-pound mass that's sitting up there in your dark skull. And it's only getting the information that is sent to it. It's not getting any independent information. It's getting information from your senses, from your body, from what's happening inside your body, outside your body, from the environment around you. And all of that is feeding into your brain. And that was kind of mind blowing to me because it's just the exact opposite of how we tend to think of the way we function.
Mhm. Yeah, I know I've heard the saying that your gut is like your second brain, but would you say after learning what you have that it's more like your first brain?
I would say your whole body. And it's not that it replaces your brain, but that they're a partnership. And so the link between body and brain can't be overlooked. And if you think that you can just always be in control, you're overlooking something very powerful that can change your feelings and emotions on a daily basis.
What are some of the simple ways that people can use their bodies to influence their happiness?
Well, there are lots of them, and being aware of your environment is really important. So, if you're feeling down, go outside. You're there in beautiful Sarasota, so you know that sunshine actually helps, and it does help your mood. There's lots of research about the power of sunshine, but even more about the power of nature and the power of the outdoors. So, wherever you are, you can step outside, you can get the pleasures of being outdoors. There's research that shows that being near water 2 hours a week dramatically improves well-being. And the 2 hours don't have to be all at once. You can take a walk, a half an hour, a few times a week. And when we think of water, we tend to think of oceans like where you are, but pretty much everywhere in the country there are lakes and ponds and streams and places where you can go and enjoy the pleasures of water. So I think simple things like that can start to make a big difference.
In your book, you mention nature and bodies of water, and it's funny because you shared that it's good to see the blue and the green. So you want to, be able to see the ocean and maybe some greenery with it, but we don't necessarily benefit from being out in the middle of the ocean and only seeing the blue, which is so true because that probably sends a different signal to our body, like some sort of panic if we can't see some sort of land, I imagine.
Right. It was the researcher named Matthew White who had done some of the really interesting research on water. And he was quite rational when I spoke to him about it and saying exactly what you just said, which is that yes, water is powerful in improving our emotions, but there's often another side to things. So, nobody would suggest that a flood is going to make you happy. And there are times that that intersection of land and water seems to be one of the happiest making places that you can be.
Another topic that kind of stuck with me was about trusting people and about love. When should we not trust someone who says, I love you?
I think that there is a power in touch, and we have to be aware of the power of touch to send a very powerful message. If you're ever having an argument with a spouse or a partner, and you kind of want it to end and you want everybody to feel better, you could have a long conversation or you could try to convince them that everything is okay. But it's far more powerful? Just reach over and touch their arm, hold their hand for a moment. And that connection just deflates everything and it sends a very powerful sensation. Touch is one of the most powerful senses that we have, and we often overlook it. And I think, in the current culture where we're so cautious about everything, we've become very careful and fearful of touch. And I understand that, but I think that there are often times when, a hug to somebody you know and care about sends a message far better than any words can.
Yes, and I feel like it also brings you into that present moment because we do get so lost in our thoughts that we can be off somewhere else. And if we do, have that touch or give that touch, then it kind of brings us back into the moment.
Right. Certainly being in the present is very powerful and important. You know, it's often said the past you can only regret and the future you can only fear. So uh, living in the moment and doing the best you can in the moment that you're in and enjoying that is very important.
And speaking of hugs, I've heard before that there's a certain amount of hugs. I don't know if it's 5 or 8 or something that we're supposed to get, quote unquote, per day, to meet some sort of made up quota to keep us, I don't know if it's happy or just neutral. But did that come up at all in your research that there's a certain amount of hugs that's more beneficial?
No, I've certainly not heard that, and I would be probably a little bit wary of putting equations on things because people respond differently, and you know, I talk in the book even about the idea of your GPS watch or your Apple Watch to count the steps that you take. And very often that backfires because, first of all, there's absolutely no research suggesting that 10,000 steps has any validity whatsoever. Walking more is better than walking less, but there's 10,000 steps was a completely made up number that has no scientific basis. And if you're out taking a walk or taking a run and you're constantly checking your watch and worrying about how far you've gone and do I have enough steps, you're doing exactly what you mentioned before about taking yourself out of the moment, taking yourself out of the present, and not enjoying the activity for the pleasure that it is. So I think we might stop counting and evaluating things quite so much and just try enjoying them. I suspect that if you decide that you need 5 hugs a day, you're not going to particularly enjoy those hugs. You're going to be focused on, did I get my 5 hugs today? Rather than just enjoying one good hug, which is probably just as good.
So true. I've heard before too that the person who walks because they enjoy walking walks the furthest.
Right. And if it's any exercise, any activity you do should be a pleasure for you. It shouldn't be something that you're groaning about. It should be something that you look forward to, and then you're going to do it. So, you know, in my research, I discovered that treadmills were originally used in Victorian prisons as a punishment. And you go like, well, okay, I get that. And now we try to put ourselves on a treadmill to make ourselves healthier and feel better. And yes, it may work a bit, but it's going to be a lot nicer if you have a pretty place to walk or run and go out and just enjoy it and enjoy the beauty around you.
I'll admit, I do use the treadmill when I do go to the gym if I'm not walking outside. But
Mm.
whenever I do, I feel like a hamster, like a hamster walking on a wheel. And to your point with measuring steps, I've gone through different phases where I have a tracker, I have a watch that I'll wear. And then it was just one day that I decided I don't want to wear this anymore. I'm just going to, I feel too rigid, too routine. Let me just live my life and not feel so regimented about how many steps I take in a day. And so I took a break from it for about 6 months. I recently started wearing it again just to track it, just to see how I'm doing since I took a break, if I'm still getting about the same amount of steps. And then I did the same thing with food. So I would weigh my food. So I was weighing my food, tracking my steps, and there's something about it that takes the joy out of it. You
Yeah,
know?
well, I'm glad you gave yourself the break. And food is a really interesting topic too, the idea of weighing food or how much you eat. One of the researchers that I spoke to has done a lot of really fascinating studies about food. And he thinks that we should start thinking about food in terms of the pleasure it gives rather than the the nutrition or the weight or whatever it is, and is it making, and so he gives the example of eating a chocolate mousse, and when you take the first bite of a chocolate mousse, it's really delicious. You're just wowed. It is so great. And then you take the second taste and it's still great. Then the third taste, your body starts getting a little bit used to it. Your brain starts getting a little bit used to it. It's not quite as novel anymore. So it's not quite as exciting. Next taste goes down, 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 till you get to the bottom of the bowl. Let's say you started at a 10. By the bottom of the bowl, you're kind of at a 2. It's almost dutiful now. You're not even tasting the chocolate mousse anymore. You're just eating it. And the pleasure that you get in that chocolate mousse is not the total of those numbers, it's the average of them. So if you stopped after 2 or 3 bites, you're at a 10. You loved that chocolate mousse. If you go all the way down to the bottom of the bowl and you average it out, you're probably at a 4 is your pleasure in it. So if we start thinking about eating in smaller portions because it gives us greater pleasure, that's a really nice way to think about it. So if we start thinking about our food as something that we want for happiness and for pleasure, then we'll probably eat a little bit less. And it's surprising how well that works. And if you think about it, when you go to some of the most expensive restaurants in America with the fanciest chefs have tasting menus, right? And I think they've figured that out. Give you a little bitty tiny taste of something, whisk it away before you get tired of it, and give you another taste. So instead of weighing your food, maybe you just want to have a few bites and let yourself enjoy them, and then go on.
Yes, exactly. I feel like that's working much better. And it's a little more intuitive.
Right, right.
Another thing that you mentioned is sitting in a hard chair versus a soft chair and how that can impact decisions. Can you explain the psychology behind this?
Yeah, isn't that crazy? Um, so there was a researcher who's now at the University of Michigan who did this, and he was having people negotiate in a sort of a hypothetical car deal to purchase a new car. And he found that when people were sitting in hard chairs, they negotiated harder than when they were sitting in soft chairs. So you could say, soft chair, soft heart, or it may be that the edginess of the chair sends a message of edginess to your brain, and you're willing to push a little bit harder. It sounds crazy, but our brains tend to think in metaphors. And there was a similar experiment that was done where people were given warm cup of coffee to hold or an iced coffee to hold. Then they were brought into a lab and they were asked to evaluate how they felt about people. And the people who were given the warm coffee to hold found the people much warmer and kinder than the people who were given the iced coffee. And again, you go, how could this possibly be? And the answer again is that our bodies are sending a message. And so our bodies are sending a message of warmth, and it kind of gets a little bit confused up there in our brain that brings the soft chair into the negotiation or the iced coffee into how we evaluate somebody. Let me give you one more example of that. Another study that was done actually by the same people out of Yale who did the hot coffee experiment, where they gave people resumes to evaluate. And that's kind of a standard psychological test to give people resumes. And so if I handed you 2 resumes, you'd think, she's checking for unconscious bias, and I'm going to be really careful not to be influenced by the person's name or ethnicity. But what you might not think about is whether you were influenced by the weight of the clipboard. And it turned out that people who were given resumes on heavy clipboards evaluated the candidates as being much more serious than the people who were given them on a light clipboard. So somehow the body was sending the signal of a heavyweight versus a lightweight. And again, if you were asked, do you think you were influenced by the weight of the clipboard? You would say, don't be ridiculous. Of course not. But you are. And understanding those unconscious messages that your body is sending can be really powerful.
Wow. Okay, with the hot and the cold drinks, I wonder, and I don't know if you'll know the answer to this, but a lot of people seem to couple up and get into relationships in the fall and the winter when it's cooler outside, unless you're, in Florida like me. And I wonder if that has anything to do with it, because when it's cooler outside, you generally choose a warm drink. So you'll have a hot coffee versus an iced, or you'll have a hot tea versus an iced tea. And I wonder if those two things are correlated, why, then you're going on dates or you're meeting people or having these warmer drinks. And maybe that softens you up to this other person that you're talking to who's also having a warm drink, perhaps, versus in the summer or the spring when you would most likely be having something cold.
I love that. Well, that's fascinating. I've certainly never thought of it that way, but I think that's great. And it makes absolute sense in terms of some of the other research that's been done. There was a study a while ago where, it was quite a while ago, where men were walking across a bridge. And halfway across the bridge, they met up with a researcher who asked them some questions and then told them, if you have anything further you'd like to discuss, here's my number. And some of the men went on a very shaky bridge, and some of them where it was really scary, and they were pretty scared by the time they got to halfway through the bridge. And the other men were on a solid bridge, so they weren't shaky or scared at all by the time they got to the middle. And the men who were on the shaky bridge were about 80% more likely to call the woman researcher afterwards, and ask her for a date or ask her to, to talk to them or meet with them again. And what was happening was when they got to the center of that bridge, and it was a shaky bridge, their heart was pounding, their hands were sweating, they were nervous. But guys don't like to admit they're nervous. So they're talking to this pretty woman, and they misattributed their emotions, their body's feelings to, oh, I think I really like her. I think I'd like to follow up with her. And that research, and this was, it's a little sexist, so forgive me, but it was done probably many years ago. And it's been followed up by all sorts of things, and it's why, very much like what you're saying about the warm drinks in the fall, maybe make people think that they like the person they're with more. People are often told, oh, if you want to get somebody excited, or to like you, go on a roller coaster ride with them, go to a scary movie with them, because their bodies get emotionally involved, their bodies get shaken, their hearts are pounding, and they may start attributing that feeling in their bodies to you rather than to the scary movie or the roller coaster. So it's a really interesting point that you raise, and it does happen that the people that we're attracted to, it's for reasons that aren't always rational, that they are very much bodily directed. And yeah, think about it the opposite way. If you're talking to somebody online and you like them endlessly online, and then you meet in person and your hand is sweaty when you shake their hand, or you don't like the way they smell, it's over, right? Your body just is telling you, yeah, this is not right. And all the rationality from before, it doesn't matter at all.
Like going on the roller coaster or being in these different scenarios where you do feel these emotions. I've also heard that if you're feeling the same emotions, so if you connect where maybe you're both going skydiving, or you're both doing an ice bath or something where you're feeling the same thing and you can connect on that, does that play a part as well if you're simultaneously experiencing the same thing in your body?
I think so. And I think also the things that you're suggesting are um, high physicality things where your body is getting stimulated, right? Skydiving or an ice bath. So, yes, you're both getting physically aroused by that activity and maybe assigning it to the person that you're with. And I can certainly see that if you're both doing it, it's gonna be a good moment of excitement for both of you.
Okay, so then for those listening, the best date ideas are ones where you're going to feel the same emotion together. And I don't think it has to be something wild like that, right? It could be even if you watch a movie and the movie evokes different emotions.
Right, but if you want to arouse that physical sensation of excitement and have that excitement misattributed to the person that you're with rather than to that movie or activity that you're doing, then yes, do a high intensity or high emotion inspiring activity.
Okay. And then speaking of building stronger relationships, I wanted to ask you about the insights behind the mind-body connection and improving work-life relationships. Is there anything there?
Well, our work environments often are places that are not inspiring to feel good, right? Often you're in bad lighting and noisy places, and all of that detracts from how you feel about your job. And I'm often stunned that after all of the research there's been about how the open offices are really not good for people's productivity or certainly for their emotional health, that they continue to be built. I just heard that the ABC network, which had beautiful offices in Midtown in New York, just moved downtown and has completely open offices. And I know a bunch of producers there who are really miserable now because we do need that sense of place and space. We like our bodies respond to certain light, our bodies respond to high ceilings and to open areas. So I think if you're working in one of those environmentally unpleasant places, you know, do try to get remote work whenever you can, or certainly try to step outside. Don't eat lunch at your desk. Get up and go out if you possibly can. And I think you're suggesting that if you're not feeling happy in your workplace, that's going to reflect on how you feel about the people who you're working with. And I think that's very true. You were talking about dating before, and if you're out on a date and you're in a dank, ugly spot, it's really hard to feel great about the person you're with, right? And I think that's true at the office also. If your environment is making you unhappy, you often tend to attribute that to the people around you rather than realizing, nah, the people are fine. It's just this place where I am is not feeling so good.
I think it also, correct me if I'm wrong, fall into the category of your home space and just keeping your home decluttered and clean and how that influences your mind and how you feel.
Absolutely. And the issue of clutter is so interesting because how many books and movies and podcasts are there about decluttering? And one of the reasons for it that we don't usually think about is how it affects our sense of calm. And there was an example given that when you're walking along, if you're out on a hike and you encounter a snake, your body recoils. Something is out of place. Your body instantly knows something is out of place. It sends a message to your brain of fear and you know to run away. If you walk into a cluttered room, your body also sends that same snake message. Something is out of place here. This doesn't feel right. This is not a calm space where everything is the way it's supposed to be. But there's a dysynchrony now because your brain says naturally, I left all that stuff out there. It's okay. So your body is continuing to send a message of discomfort, which your brain doesn't know what to do with because your brain knows that you put the stuff there. And so it's such an interesting reason to try to declutter and to try to keep smooth surfaces because it actually does give a much greater sense of body, mind, synchrony, and calm, which helps you function every day.
This is mind blowing to me. Okay, so I could have a bunch of stuff on top of my living room table and I can feel uncomfortable, but I can know, mentally I know that I put that stuff there. It's not, a snake. I don't need to be scared of it, but I can feel uncomfortable and I could look at 100 other reasons of why I might feel uncomfortable. But really, if I just clean up the mess, then that's it.
I think so. I think it will help enormously. Um, I'm one of those people, I find that when I'm leaving my house, sometimes I look over at I have a big dining room table with a lot of chairs around it. And if the chairs aren't pushed in and even, I have trouble leaving the house. I am not obsessive compulsive in any way, but it just feels something is off to me. And I'll tell myself, just leave, you can fix it later. But I always go back and put the chairs so that they're neatly around the table because there's just a sense of rightness about it and a sense of calm that makes you feel good and is going to make you feel good when you come back into the house. And so, yeah, clean up that pile of papers or put them away, and I think you'll feel better when you walk into your space.
I do the same thing, only with the kitchen. I can't have, a single dirty dish. The sink needs to be cleaned. I can't, if I wake up to it and I left something there, it's not a good start.
Right, right.
The connection between tasting menus and body awareness. Can you elaborate on this?
Yeah, well, that's what I was talking about before with the idea of the pleasure of eating just a small portion of something. And so if you eat that small portion, you enjoy it far more. And we tend to think that what we taste is what we taste and what we see is what we see and so forth. But the truth is that we taste and eat with all of our senses. And there's been really interesting research that if you put a cheese on an angular plate, it's going to taste sharper to people than if you put it on a round plate. Food seems to taste sweeter to people when it's in white plates versus black plates. And none of this really seems to make a lot of sense. Obviously, it's the same food, but once again, our senses are working together. They're taking in all sorts of different information. There was one study I loved where a researcher gave people a glass of whiskey. And they held onto the glass of whiskey, and he had set up three different rooms with dramatically different environments and different lighting. One of the rooms looked like it was outdoors, one of the rooms looked like it was in Europe. And as the people went into each room, they enjoyed the rooms for a few minutes, and then they were asked to evaluate the whiskey, how it tasted. And in each room, they evaluated the taste of the whiskey very different. So when they were in the room that was outdoorsy and felt very nature, they described the whiskey as having sort of a grassy taste. And when they were in a room with bright lights, they described the whiskey as being a bit brassy. And as the researcher said at the end, the people realized they had been holding the same glass of whiskey the whole time. And so they realized nobody had tricked them. They had tricked themselves. And it was very striking because they weren't trying to fool them. They weren't giving them a different whiskey in each room and asking them to evaluate it and then saying at the end, haha, it was the same whiskey all the time, but you evaluated it differently. They actually knew they were holding the same whiskey. But the input from our senses, from our environment, is so powerful that it can truly change the way we taste something, the way we experience something. Um, that same researcher did some interesting, similar research on wine, and he came up with what he referred to as the Provençal rosé paradox, which is that rosé wine always tastes better in Provence, the south of France, than it does when you get the same bottle at home. And, I joke about it in terms of drinking wine in Paris, that when you have a glass of wine in Paris, it always tastes fabulous. And it's because you're not just drinking the wine, you're drinking in Paris, you're drinking in the atmosphere of the cafe, you're drinking in that this is the most romantic city in the world. And this has happened to me. I was with my husband. We loved a wine that we were drinking. We came home, we bought the same wine. It was fine. The environment in which you taste something, drink something, the amount of it, as you said, that we eat of it, has a big influence on how we feel about it.
I'm wondering if this has to do with why some people like certain foods and other people can't stand those foods. Like maybe person A ate broccoli in a really nice environment with people that they loved, and that was when they first tried it when they were a kid for the first time, and they actually grew up loving broccoli. And someone else, they I don't know, broccoli is a bad example because most kids probably didn't like it and they were probably forced to eat it. But you know what I mean? If there's a certain type of food that one person absolutely loves and another person can't stand it. I mean, I know people who can't do bananas and other people that eat 10 of them a day.
Yeah, and often it is, you're exactly right. Often it is some particular aversion that you developed. I mean, if you've ever gotten sick after you ate a particular food and not even from that food, say you had a stomach flu and you had just eaten a banana, and you're sick for a couple of days, there's a good chance you're just going to associate that with bananas, right? And never want them again. A friend of mine told me that he couldn't remember why it was, but he had had a bad experience with pesto at some point, and he always said that he hated pesto. He hadn't eaten pesto in 20 years. He just does not like pesto. And then he was somewhere, and somehow he got pesto without realizing it was pesto. And he said, "Wow, this was really good. What is this?" And he discovered, "Oh, I actually do like pesto." So often our tastes are indeed influenced by experience, expectation, rather than just the actual information from the taste buds. Just one other thing on that when you're saying what some people like and some people dislike. It's sort of like if you look at a painting, right? Um, the image from the painting on your retina and on my retina is the same. It's the same image. But I might look at that painting and say, "Oh, that's beautiful." And you might look at it and you go, "That's weird. I don't like that at all." So it's our brain then interpreting the information that's coming in. And that's the same thing that's happening with food. You eat that broccoli or the pesto or the banana, and your taste buds are sending the same information. But then your brain has to interpret it and decide what to do with it.
Right. Yes, it has all these different beliefs and these different lenses to go through, to filter through before we actually make a decision of how we feel about this thing. The body and the mind are just so fascinating. Okay, if you could offer 4 specific strategies to be happier in 2025, what would they be?
Well, I think there are so many little tweaks that we can do. And I think the first big one would be to understand, first big one would be to read the book and learn some of the things that are actually happening. But if I can give some little specifics that are fun and funny that I think can make you happier in the coming year, when you're feeling down, we already said go outside, enjoy being outside, enjoy the pleasures of being outside. Something very small you can do, sit up straighter, stand up straighter. There's research that when you're slumped, your body, it's sort of like what we started with the facial experience. It's the same with your body. When you're slumped, your brain is going, "Oh, we're depressed here," right? Because when you are unhappy, you naturally slump. And if you're finding yourself slouched over your computer, your body is sending messages of being unhappy. And if you sit up a little bit straighter, it becomes much easier to access positive emotions, to feel happier about things. So try that and give that smile that we talked about at the beginning. Bring some flowers into your house. It's a really simple thing. They don't have to be expensive. Go to the grocery store and get some flowers because flowers, again, because of the various sensory things that are happening, flowers make people happier. Try to have a new experience. Our brains, much as they are wonderful and smart, are basically lazy and they like to do as little as possible. So if everything is the same, our brains go into sort of a status quo and aren't paying much attention to what's going on around us. We actually like that feeling of being aroused and awakened and excited. And that happens when something new occurs. And it doesn't have to be dramatic. Certainly, if you can go on a vacation, go on a vacation, but otherwise, drive in a different direction to the grocery store. It's going to awaken your brain to pay attention, and that's going to make you feel a little bit better. Go to a farmer's market and get a fruit that you've never tasted before. And that's going to add some excitement to your brain and to how you feel. And if you just want to feel calmer and happier, some of those things we talked about before, have that warm cup of coffee or tea or cocoa that you can wrap your hands around that'll send a message of warmth to your brain. Throw some soft pillows around your couches in your house to have a sense of softness and comfort. And just being aware of all of these little things that you can do can make a big difference.
I have two closing questions for you, but before I ask them, what's next for Janice Kaplan? Do you have anything exciting coming up?
Well, I'm always writing and I'm always coming up with the next book idea. I had done the Gratitude Diaries a few years ago, which was a very popular book, and that was about how you can use your mind to make yourself happier, how you can live gratefully and think about things in a different perspective. And this book is sort of the twist on that, how you can use your body to make yourself happier. So it's always interesting to me to be thinking about the things that we can do for ourselves that we're not always aware of. And right now, I'm excited about making sure people read this book and get some of the tips in it that can make them happier and think about themselves in a different way.
It is so good. And Janice is being humble. Her book, The Gratitude Diaries, was a New York Times best-selling book.
It was. And I continue to hear from people who found the book important and felt that it really gave them inspiration and hope and a way of looking at new things. And plus, it's a fun book to read. And I think this book is also. I like to write things so that it's just fun to read and an easy way to get the information.
It is, yes. Okay. Janice, what is your number one health tip? So whether that is mindset, diet and nutrition, physical, emotional, the one piece of advice that you would like everyone to know.
Well, given what I've written, I think part of it is about always looking for the good in a situation. I think that we can't control the events that happen to us. We can't always control the physical circumstances of our health, but we can make ourselves think about what's positive and find some of the ways to look for life in a more positive way. And I think that affects our health, our well-being, mental and emotional and physical.
For your final question, it will be a more personal question, and you get to choose it by picking a number 1 through 100.
Oh gosh, 44.
Oh, that is my birthday, so that is my favorite number. 44. What does leaving a legacy mean to you?
Hmm. So, what is this list of questions that you're reading from?
They're thought-provoking.
They are indeed. Um, I think a legacy is obviously you want to be remembered as somebody who brought joy to the world. And I would like to be remembered as somebody or thought of as somebody who was good and kind and cared about spreading happiness and looking for the positive in my children, in my family, in my spouse, in myself. And I think if we can think, when we think about people and we think about them as, I remember her as the person who always smiled. I remember her as the person who I felt good being around. I think that would be a lovely legacy to have.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Janice. And I am not, this is not an understatement when I say that this book has changed my life. And I really recommend that everyone listening go and get it. I have not read the Gratitude Diaries, but that will be next. And then this one that we talked about here today is what your body knows about happiness, how to use your body to change your mind. And I will definitely have that linked into the description. And thank you again, Janice, so much. This was so much fun.
Thank you. It was really great to talk with you.